Happy Thursday, everyone. We've almost made it to the weekend, and I hope you're as excited as I am to finally be done with another work week. You know, some mornings I sit out in my backyard and I look at the field behind my house, so full of Indian grass and other colorful plants, and I feel so blessed to get to relax a little bit and play with chickens and write cool stories and just spend time with you guys. It's so nice to be able to sit around the fire, and whether it's real or not, and tell all these great stories and just have fellowship with all of you. I'm truly blessed in so many ways, and I want to thank you guys for that because, without you guys, I'd just be here talking to myself, wouldn't I? Well, let's get to the stories. Today's topic of discussion is strange holidays, and I think I've got some pretty good stories for it today. Let's start off with a story about a festival in a town, a very strange festival, a deadly festival. So, get your masks and your knives ready. Let's go participate in Purge of Rats.
The celebration of Purge Rats was a celebration that was highly anticipated in my town. The celebration is always capped off by the hunting of the mice, which was the highlight of the event. On the first day of the feast, we opened the door to find 3 masks attached to our doorknob. This occurred year after year for as long as I could remember, and I didn't think it was strange at all. Every year we would open the door, find the cat masks, long, wiry whiskers and pointy black ears, hanging from the doorknob to our home. There would be one for my mother, one for my father, and one for me. We would wear them at the festival, riding the rides and playing the games, lifting them only slightly to eat food at the feast as we gave praise to Saint Rocher. This year, however, was special for me. I was 13, old enough to do a day's work if I chose, old enough to have my own money and to have my own responsibilities, old enough to participate in what came after the feast, old enough to participate in the Purge of Rats. I had always watched from the windows of the council hall with the other children as the people in the cat masks went about freeing us from the rats. You could see them sometimes, the big rats with their pointed noses and coarse whiskers, running through the streets as the cats turned them from wherever they had been hiding. I asked Mother what they were. They were larger than the rats I had seen in the pantry on occasions, and she had told me that these were the undesirables, those who Saint Rocher had chosen to purge from the community, and that it was the job of the town to become his cats and free the community of them. I asked her once if we could be chosen by Saint Rocher to be purged on that night. She told me I'd better pray it never happened. Those who were purged during the Purge of Rats were cursed and removed from the town after they were destroyed. This was the year I would discover what that truly meant. I went to the festival in my mask, excited for the night to come. As I played the games, danced the Danza de Ratha, and ate at the feast, I couldn't help but think of taking to the streets with my father and mother that night to help purge the unclean from our town. Mother had said that they were Saint Rocher's enemies, said that her father had said they were filled with spirits who had brought the plague to our city when she was a girl. If they didn't purge all of them, they would bring it there again. I was excited to go out and bring honor to my family as I drove these rats out of the city, but I was a little scared too. It was that feeling you get just before doing something dangerous and exciting, like riding a wild horse. You fear the action, but you can't wait for the ride. I was a little sad, though. My friend Maria wasn't there. She never missed the festival, and not seeing her made me wonder if she was sick. Her father wasn't a nice man, my father said. He didn't support the festival, and he had tried to argue for having it canceled many times. He always seemed nice to me when I visited Maria, but I knew well enough not to argue with my father. I didn't see Maria all day, and as we went home with the setting sun, I hoped I would see her tonight. We returned home and ate at the midnight feast that my parents always ate before it was time to go to the night's work. I tucked in greedily, knowing that I would need my strength for what was to come. God help me. I was so young, I didn't know what was in store for me. As we ate, I asked my mother about the people who didn't go to the festival. She looked critically, asking what I meant. I told her I saw someone peeking through the windows of their home. They'd moved away from the window quickly, but I had marked them by their whiskers and their beady eyes. Mother said that those people were not to be trusted, and that clearly they had been infested by the spirits Saint Rocher wanted us to expel from the city that night. I nodded, making a note of that house in my mind. Their house was close to ours, and my parents and I could get there easily and chase them out. When the deep thrum of the midnight bell tolled, Father donned his mask and led us to the kitchen. There would be no need to take me to the chapel for safekeeping that night. He handed each of us a knife from the knife block, saving the sharpest knife for me. It was a long, curved fillet knife, and he told me not to be afraid to swing it hard. These aren't people anymore, and we must expunge the plague from the city. I nodded, not understanding entirely, but I soon would. We left the house, and I took them to the house I had seen earlier, seeing the other cats as they moved through the city. They were moving in clusters, groups of 5 or 10, and soon we would be taken into the Clouder easily. The other cats around me were a comfortable weight, all of them people I knew, though I didn't know that I knew them. They followed us as we went, letting us lead them to the rats. The lights were off when we approached, the house dark and the windows shuttered. I figured this would be the time that we would scare the mice out of their holes. I'd seen my kitten, Georgette, scare mice out of their holes before. She would pretend to be interested in one hole, and then when the mice would poke their heads out of the other hole and come hesitantly out, she would dash at them and scare them out of the house. She would run them and run them. Her little kitten energy was boundless, until Mother finally saw them, swept them out with her broom, crying, "Purge of Rats," as she swept them from our house. But we were no kittens, it seems, and this city did not hunt like that. The stone made me jump when it crashed through the window. The window shattered inward, and I heard someone shriek. We had scared the rats, and now they would come running out. But this was also how kittens hunted. Several of the cats, the ones with clubs as well as knives, cleared the glass out of the window and climbed through easily. The shrieks from inside were undoubtedly more human than mouse-like, but when the door burst open, one of the rats ran for it, just like the rats at home. No broom came out to sweep him away. The Clouder fell on him, and I saw his hands come up to reach as the knives came down. I stopped as I saw what they were doing, feeling a little sick, as I saw the blood leaking from the rat. He was bigger than I had expected, bigger than me, and he twitched as he lay there. I took a step back, not really wanting to get close, but my mother pushed me forward as her hands stopped my retreat. I looked back into her cat mask and saw her gentle eyes as she pushed me again. "Go on, honey. Get a cut in." I stepped forward, some of my excitement dulled by fear, and saw the gurgling rat looking up at me as it bled onto the cobbles. Its black eyes stared at me, and it coughed wetly, though its lips didn't move. I held my knife in a shaky hand, preparing to strike, when the rat suddenly reached out for me, locking its hand around my ankles. My fear gripped me, and I suddenly stabbed out with the knife. I stabbed the rat again and again and again, closing my eyes as I stabbed his arm, his back, his neck. The hand went limp as he flopped onto the cobbles. The Clouder cheered, and we were off again. We ran, drunk off our own power, and found a pair of rats in the street as they dodged another group. They were cutting down an alley as we came upon them, but they looked up at our group as it came close. One of them took off down the alley, but the other just stood there, frozen in terror, as the Clouder fell on her. She screamed as we stabbed her, but I broke off to pursue the other one as they finished stabbing and beating her. I didn't want her to get away, and my blood was up. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want one of the rats for myself, too. I ran after her, leaving the others behind, and found her just as she hit the wall of the alley. She turned seeing me, and started looking around fitfully. I could almost taste her fear as I closed in, knife at the ready. I, too, would purge my town of rats. "Please," she begged, and her words gave me pause. She was speaking. Did rats speak? None of the rats I'd ever seen spoke. Of course, none of the rats I had ever seen were big either. The speaking rat made me falter for a moment, and she took full advantage of this as she tried to reason with me. "Please, please don't hurt me. I'll give you whatever you want. I just don't want to die." I heard the Clowder coming up behind me, yelling as they came, and their presence gave me strength. I ran forward, and I shoved the knife at her, the blade sinking into her abdomen as she tried to back away. As it went in, I yelled, "Purge of Rats!" and I could see her dress starting to redden as her hands gripped the knife. She cut her fingers, and she fell to her knees as the Clowder came into the alley with a shout of mirth. I pulled the knife out and ran to my father. He pulled me into his arms and whispered, "You're a natural." At that moment, I was so proud. My family was doing something special, and we were united. Sometimes it almost felt like we lived on our own, only seeing each other for dinner. But now we were doing something we could all enjoy, and I couldn't wait till next year. I didn't have the slightest idea what I was doing, but I would soon find out. I followed the Clowder, growing bolder as we went, until we came to the next house. They pounded on the door, yelling for the rats to come out and face their fate. Everyone else was waiting expectantly, waiting for the door to open so they could charge the house and kill these rats. I was confused, though. There must have been a mistake. This couldn't be the rats' house. They were looking for rocks to break the window, but I just shook my head and felt my confusion mount. This couldn't be the right house. This was Maria's house. The door opened suddenly, and Maria's father stepped out onto the stoop. He wasn't wearing a mask. His face was set in a stoic cast, and he raised his rifle and pointed it at the mob. Some of them backed away, but most of them only seemed to take more pleasure from his presence. They mumbled to themselves, gripping their knives and preparing to charge. Maria's father cast his gaze around at them, his eyes falling on me for a moment before sliding away. "I'm not wearing that damn mask. This whole celebration is an abomination. If you mean to take my family, then you can come and try. I'll take a few of you with me. Just remember, which of you will be wearing a rat mask next year?" I backed away from the Clowder, slowly, my knife hitting the cobbles. No one noticed the metallic sound, or the scream that followed it as the rifle blammed loudly. One of the cats had charged him, thinking he wouldn't shoot, and now he lay bleeding on his doorstep. The gun went off again a moment later, but I didn't see who had been killed that time. I was running, head down, my mask forgotten, as I turned from the carnage that I now understood was not a magic festival or a fight for our town from giant rats. We were killing our friends, our neighbors, and I would never understand why. I ran as the tears streamed down my face, and I didn't stop running until the sounds of rats and cats were behind me. I ran until the woods enveloped me, the lush fairy tale woods that seemed to surround our home. The trees whipped at me, the roots pulled at me, and I just kept running. I ran from the horror, from the chaos, and I didn't stop until the ground went out from under me. Suddenly I was tumbling. I was rolling down something, and I put my hands up to my face to protect myself. I was so confused, so frightened, and when I hit my head on something, my vision got very blurry. I kept rolling, struggling to maintain my consciousness. I was slapping against the bushes and banging against small rocks, and when I finally came to a rest, I felt warm, solid ground beneath me. When the lights engulfed me, leaving me in a warm circle, I passed out. I woke up in a hospital. The nurses said I had been found lying on a major highway, a truck driver having brought me here after calling the police. I'd been unconscious for a while, a day at least, and I had a pretty massive head wound that would need to heal. The doctor said I had a small skull fracture, and that I definitely had a concussion. They kept me for a month, most of which was trying to get me to tell them who I was and where I was from. I feigned memory loss. The women in Mother's books lost their memories sometimes after an accident. I did not want to go back home. I knew for a fact that if I went home, after running away from the festival, that my family might very well find rat masks on their door next year. I also didn't want to face the wrath of my parents and my community. No one refused to participate in the festival, or, like Maria's father, they were made to play the rats. After a month, I was sent to an orphanage where I was adopted. The country I'm from doesn't have the best track record when it comes to placing children into foster homes, or even having them adopted by good families, but I suppose I got lucky. Glenda and Mark were from the United States, here to do missionary work. When Glenda heard about my story, she became interested in me. She said that it seemed to be God's will that she help me, and they adopted me right then and there. They stayed for a few years, helping me get back on my feet, and when they went home, they helped me gain citizenship and become a United States citizen. I moved with them to San Diego and attended college. I never told them about my village, or the Purge Rats, and they never pushed me. I think they suspected that my amnesia was self-inflicted, and they're honestly the best parents I ever could have asked for. I'm 30 now, married with a new baby in a place of my own. My husband, Marco, is a wonderful father, and we couldn't be happier. He works as a civil engineer for a large company, and I work as a nurse when I'm not at home with Hugo. Glenda and Mark, my mom and dad, are always welcome at our house, and I can't imagine a better life than the one I have. A life that my past is threatening to take away. You see, when I went to get the mail today, I noticed something hanging on the door of our apartment. I saw the masks, laughing and thinking it was a Halloween thing from the neighbors. But when I picked them up, the wiry whiskers stuck painfully into my hand. I dropped them and stared in horror. They were masks, all right. 3 of them, and they all were gray lacquered faces of rats. The whiskers were frayed metal wires, and the nose of one had been broken in the fall, a delicate black bulb that now lay on the pavement beside the mask. There were 3 masks, as I said, and the third was the one that filled me with the most dread. 2 were normal-sized, easily capable of fitting an adult face, but the third was small, delicate, the eyes carved to make it look scared and sad. A mask for a baby. There was a note inside one, and I thought I would tear it as my shaking hands reached out to open it. The paper was rough, handmade, and the ink was thick and blocky. The village made its own paper, its own ink, and rarely traded with others. I had no doubt that the masks had been made by the same old man that used to make them every year. I felt the tears come on, and as I read the note, the concrete bit into my knees as I went down to them to sob into the paper. The note read, "Joyous Purge Rats. Join us this evening for the Purge de Rats. If you cannot attend, don't worry. We will bring the celebration to you."
So go ahead and set your calendars for next year. Maybe you can be part of the celebration as well. Coming up next, we have a story about a town with a strange tradition. A town with a sometimes deadly tradition. So let's learn a little more about Resurrection Day. The town of Rawson, in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, has a ritual that's very well loved by the population. Rawson is a pretty big place, though you may have never heard of it. It has a working steel mill, a slaughterhouse that sells its meat everywhere in the South, and a very lucrative pulpwood operation that provides paper trees for a lot of different mills. It's a great place to live. It does so without the need for corporate inclusion. You won't find any Walmarts or Dollar Generals in Rawson. It's a town where the mom and pop shop holds sway, and the town council is just as beholden to the people as they are to the businesses. The town council is another oddity that you'll only find in Rawson. The same 7 families have sat on the council since the 1800s, and not just out of a sense of nepotism. There are elections, people do run against them, but even those people vote for the same town council. James Miller, the owner of the Pulpwood Grove, Coral Masterly, the owner of the Steel Factory, Jim Doherty, the owner of the Steel Foundry, Todd and Melanie McCormick, who run the slaughterhouse, and Evelyn Ramsey, who's the owner of a large chunk of land that a lot of other things are on. They're the current city council, but their families have always run the town for as long as anyone can remember. It's not a bad system. They don't swindle the town treasury. They don't make deals that would put money in their pockets while hurting the town. And they don't take bribes, at least not as far as anyone knows. What they do is keep the town the way it is. They keep all the modern conveniences, such as CVS and McDonald's, out of the town. The town just got broadband internet 5 years ago, and that was only because they cut a deal with a local provider. Even the phones in town are run by a local branch, and most people still prefer home phones rather than cell phones. In a lot of ways, Rawson is a town out of time, and lots of people come to see it and spend their money there. What brings in a lot of them around Easter season is Resurrection Day, a town ritual that has existed for as long as anyone can remember. On Resurrection Eve, one of the councilmen, or councilwomen, is selected to be the resurrectee. They're taken to Proctor Cemetery and sealed inside the resurrection grave for 3 days. They bring no food or water with them, and most of them go into the casket, smiling and laughing as they wave at the crowd. The casket is sealed, the earth is replaced, and everyone leaves so that whatever magic is supposed to happen can happen. In 3 days' time, the council person in question is dug up, the casket is opened, and they stumble out and proclaim another year of prosperity for Rawson. If they look a little younger, their wrinkles replaced with baby fine skin, then no one notices. They clap and they cheer, and things go on in the town as they always have. It's good for the town. It's good for everyone. But someone had begun to notice, and someone wanted answers. Come on, Mr. Salazar. I just want to do a piece on the town ritual. There's nothing wrong with having a little town spirit, is there? Mr. Salazar, the editor-in-chief at the Rawson Journal, stared at Selena through the rising smoke off his cigar. He liked Selena. She was a good writer, and she was hungry for news in a way that you didn't often see with young people. The fact that she was easy on the eyes had very little to do with it, but an old lech like Salazar could still appreciate it. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of town spirit, honey, but what I have a problem with is you poking your nose where it doesn't belong. I got Jamie working on the Resurrection Day piece, and I believe I have you working on a piece about the Easter parade. Selena rolled her eyes and flopped into the chair in front of his desk. Salazar liked the way she flopped, but the look on her face told him that there was going to be trouble. Come on, Andy. You and I both know that kid couldn't find news in a classified section. People are tired of just taking your word for the fact that Resurrection Day is just normal. It's 2026. People have internet now. The young people can look it up and see that what's going on here is a normal. They want answers. They want to know what's really going on. And I want to bring them that. Mr. Salazar raised his eyebrow as he glared at Selena. I'm only going to tell you this one more time, kid. You keep your nose out of this, and maybe you live long enough to be editor-in-chief one of these days. I don't want to hear another word about it. You cover the Easter parade like you're supposed to. You keep drawing your paycheck, and you keep putting out the news. Don't make me regret hiring you. Selena threw up her hands and stormed out of his office. She and Anthony Salazar had come to blows like this before. When she wanted to do an expose on the pulpwood field and its miraculous regrowth every year, he had told her to leave it alone. When she wanted to look into the slaughterhouse and figure out how a town with only 2 cattle ranches supplied enough beef for a multi-state operation, he had told her to let it go. When she had wanted to look into the steel foundry and figure out how it was the only working one in this part of the country,
He had encouraged her to go talk to the owner and do a piece on that, but not to dig too deeply. Selena had been doing what she was told. She had been eating shit and smiling, but now this was something she wanted answers to. She wanted answers to a lot of things, and this might be the first step in getting them. Go cover the Easter parade like a good little girl, she groused as she flopped down in her desk and began typing. Oh, she'd cover the Easter parade. Then she'd figure out what was really going on with this town. The first thing to do was to talk to Mary Worth. Mary Worth had once been a member of the council as well, or her great-grandmother had. The Worths had once owned several large cattle runs, controlling 80% of the beef that was used by the slaughterhouse. They had sat on the council, they'd been well respected, but then something had happened during the ritual one year, and everything had gone to pot pretty quickly. Their cattle had begun dying, their land had been sold to pay off debt, and the family had fallen into relative obscurity. The family now owned only a single farm on the outskirts of town, and Mary was the last remaining member of that line. Mary was considered to be something of a town crazy. She was always telling weird stories and making outlandish claims, but Selena thought she might be just what she was looking for. The woman was sitting on the front porch, as she almost always was. She lived alone, and being outside seemed to soothe her somewhat. She was sitting out there with only the creak of the rocking chair to keep her company, and as Selena pulled up, she saw her reach for the rifle that was leaned against the house. People like to come out here and mess with Miss Worth, and Selena wouldn't blame her for being a little bit paranoid. Whoa, 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 I don't want any trouble. I work for the paper. I'm doing a story on Resurrection Day. Have you got a minute to talk to me? The old woman seemed to contemplate it for a moment, before putting the gun back against the house and turning back to stare at Selena with her roomy old eyes. Why, I suppose I might. Nothing but time to spare these days. Social Security pays for my groceries and my taxes, but not much else. Certainly doesn't pay for company, so I guess I got a little bit of time. Selena sat down and contemplated what exactly to ask the woman. She hadn't expected to get this far, and it was a wonder that she hadn't been shot, or at least shot at. She took out her recorder and made notes before beginning. Your family used to be on the council, isn't that right? For close on 50 years, we sure were. We provided the meat for the slaughterhouse, and for a while, people respected us. Respect is pretty easy to get, but it's not easy to keep. People only really respect you until you don't have anything, and ours was thanks to Resurrection Day. You've told people that before. What exactly happened on Resurrection Day, all those years ago? Oh, that was back when my great-grandmother was on the city council. She'd been serving with them since 1901. She'd probably be serving with them still if her number hadn't come up. You know how it goes. Every year they draw somebody's name, and that person has to go into the ground for 3 days. It was her turn, and it was the first time she had gone in a while. She was nervous. We didn't understand what she was nervous about. It was just a harmless town ritual, but she assured us that it was just nerves. She let 'em put her in the casket, and she went into the ground for 3 days, and when they pulled her out, something was very wrong. My great-grandmother had been skinned alive down there. Every bit of her had been skinned to the bone, and she had the most god-awful look of horror on her face that I had ever seen. She was screaming when it happened. You could tell because her mouth was open and everything. I don't think my parents had intended for us to see her, but when they popped that casket open, we all got a look. I've never heard of anyone dying during the ritual. Has it happened before? Twice more. It only happened 3 times in the entirety of the town's history, and every time it does, it always tips the power structure of the town. Why, the first time it was Jensen Mallory, who'd been a banker. Time after that, it was Cletus Summerland, who had once owned the land that my great-grandmother's farm had been on before she turned it into a cattle ranch. The families were never the same afterward. Most of them were dead within 2 generations, completely wiped out forever. I suspect it'll be the same with my family as well. I'm okay with that. Seems a shame for it to end like that, but that is the way of the town. What do you mean? Selena asked, making notes as she tried to get it all down. They call this town Rurin, but that's not quite right. It's not named after anything you could really put your finger on. It's named after a creature. A creature? What sort of creature? Back before he died in 1995, I had a cousin who snuck out to the cemetery during the resurrection night. He told me he saw something there that would haunt him until the day he died. It was something looming over the grave with the councilman in it. But before he could see much more, it turned and looked at him, and he said he ran like the devil himself was after him. It sounds to me like you might want to go have yourself a look at the graveyard during the ritual. Maybe there's something there that'll clue you in to what's going on around here. Selena thanked Mary and headed back into town. She wanted to be ready for tonight. It seemed like there was more to see in the graveyard than old relatives, and she meant to have a good seat for when it started. Selena, I really wish you would just let this go. Jasper, her roommate, was watching her pack a small bag as she prepared to go out for what he often called guerrilla journalism. It's perfect, Jasper. All I have to do is sit in the Worcester Mausoleum and find out what's going on during the resurrection ritual. It's easy. No one's going to see me. No one's going to be there. It should be the easiest thing in the world, and it won't cost me anything. All I have to do is leave in the morning, and no one will ever be the wiser. Yeah, and what if you run into something that's a little more than nothing? What if the town elders are, I don't know, they're doing something awful out there, and they find you peeking and decide that you've got to go? I like having you as a roommate. You pay your rent on time, and you don't make a lot of mess. You can't always get that from people in this town. Selena rolled her eyes at him as she threw her bag over her shoulder. If you want me to keep paying my rent on time, then I have to go out there and do things like this. Even if the journal doesn't want it, I can sell it to somebody higher up the food chain and make a mint. Stories about rich people up to dastardly things are real big right now. I'm not saying that this could be the next Epstein files, but it very likely could be. You watch the news, you know stories like this are big. Jasper sighed as he put a hand on her shoulder. Just be careful. I meant it. I really don't want to have to find another roommate. She headed out then, feeling that she had a pretty good grasp on what was going on, but honestly, having no real idea what to expect. Getting into the cemetery had been easy. No one was really watching a boneyard, and it had been easy to jump the fence and get into the cemetery. She hadn't expected a lot of trouble on that end, and she didn't encounter any issues until she got to the mausoleum. The Worcester Mausoleum was a city landmark, had been since she was a kid. The Worcesters had been one of the founding families, and they spared no expense on their final resting place. The mausoleum was covered in pictures and symbols, things from folklore and the like. It was artistically significant, and most people knew it by sight. She'd been in there before, researching one story or another, but today she found that the door was locked. It wasn't something that happened very often. The mausoleum was usually open to visitors, but
She supposed maybe they had decided to get in ahead of the vandals that sometimes they had to deal with around this time of year. Luckily, she had brought a little crowbar with her, and a quick snap and a pop, and she was inside. The mausoleum was grand, but it certainly didn't have the benefit of air conditioning. It was cool and damp, and as the sun set outside, she found a perfect vantage point near the back corner. They had built little vents into the mausoleum, probably hoping to let some light in when people came to visit, and from the grate she had a perfect view of the resurrection mound. She hoped Councilman Doherty was comfortable enough in there, but she also hoped that maybe he had sand and worms in his pants as well. Councilman Doherty was the one that had told her to stop being a child at last year's budget meeting, when she had asked him why only a third of the budget seemed to go into the town. He had always been critical of the media, and she hoped his discomfort would make him think about the town at the start of the fiscal year. She waited for what felt like hours, and as her watch ticked closer to midnight, she started to wonder if maybe Mary Worth had really just been a crazy old lady. She was out here in the cemetery on the word of a woman who had been known to walk up the street naked and who had been arrested 3 times for making threats against the council and the police force. She felt foolish now, her determination feeling more like misplaced indignation. It was going to be a bad day tomorrow if she had to stand out in the heat and watch the parade. But she would do it because that was what you did when you were a journalist. She had started to nod off a little. Something you would have said would have been impossible in a place like that. And that's when she heard the footsteps of something large and angry sounding. It was huge, a creature that blocked out the moon as it covered the windows of the entire mausoleum. It was gray, its ears long as they pointed into the trees, and it approached the grave with loud, galumping steps. It had long arms that ended in claws, and it easily tore up the earth as it lifted the casket out in a matter of seconds. Selena could hear something moving in there, not out of any kind of discomfort, but maybe out of anticipation. And as it pulled the lid off, she saw Councilman Doherty peeking out at the creature. It said something to him, its voice watery and a little garbled, and when the councilman answered in kind, Selena supposed that that was what it spoke. She didn't think that was a sound that a human throat should be able to make, but the creature must have understood him, because he gripped him under the arms and pulled. The councilman's skin came off like wrapping paper, or like one of those oranges that some people can peel in a single pull. He skinned him in 2 hard pulls of the armpit, and she heard Councilman Doherty cry out to the moon like a shot deer. The creature stuffed the skin into his mouth as the councilman lay twitching in the coffin that he had been sealed in, and as it ate, its face looked euphoric for the experience. It enjoyed its treat, and as it finished and turned back to the councilman, Selena had a horrifying revelation. Councilman Doherty was looking at the mausoleum, and his lidless eyes looked wide with surprise. He could see her. She knew he could, but it seemed the creature wasn't quite done with him yet. The creature, the Rawson, Selena supposed, began packing the coffin with the rich clay that lay beneath the surface all over town. He sealed Councilman Doherty into the casket with it, each handful entombing him inside the casket. His eyes were the last, and they stared at Selena the whole time as he was buried alive. Then the creature put the top on the casket and buried him in the earth before leaping over the wall of the cemetery and running off for God knew where. Selena waited an hour, maybe 2, and then she ran out of the mausoleum as quickly as she could. She didn't know what to do with what she had just seen, but she knew that she couldn't publish it in this town. The people who knew would bury her right beside the councilman, and the people who didn't would never believe her. The Rawson was as much a part of the town council as the councilors were, and it would probably be more than happy to bury her right along with anyone else who spoke up. Hey, boss, I got that parade article written up. I went ahead and emailed it to you, but it said your email was deactivated, so Selena came into his office, but noticed he was in the midst of packing things away. He hadn't had a lot in there. 2 file boxes had taken care of it. And when he looked up at her, she saw that there was an odd mixture of respect and hatred on his face. Mr. Salazar didn't often look afraid, and there was definitely a little fear in there as well, as he sat the box down and gave her a searching look. Guess you'll be emailing those to yourself from now on. I got a job offer to be the editor-in-chief in a town about 50 miles from here. It's a good job, big jump in pay, but I guess I'll be leaving the paper in good hands. What are you talking about? Selena asked as she stepped in and closed the door. The council wants you to be the editor-in-chief of the Rawson Journal. It's quite an honor for someone your age, and I can assure you that some of the staff is probably going to have a problem with it. I'm not worried. I think you'll do all right. Selena let that sink in, not quite sure how to take it. Was this some kind of bribe for what she had seen? How would the council even know? She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't even written any of it down. She had come in late enough that Jasper had been asleep. When he had woke up, he had asked her what happened, and she had told him that she hadn't seen anything. She didn't like lying to people, but she couldn't tell him the truth. No one would believe her. Mr. Salazar put a hand on her shoulder, and when she looked into his face, this time what she saw was pity. I told you to leave it alone. Told you to just cover the parade and leave all the rest of it behind. But you had to pursue it. Now you've made a choice. Are you going to accept the counselor's decision, or are you going to continue to rock the boat? This is a cage, Selena, but it's your cage, and I suppose you can decorate it however you want. He grabbed his box and left then, leaving Selena in her new office to figure out what would come next. The town car pulled up a few days later as Selena was leaving for home. The voice from inside told her to get in, and Selena obeyed even though it was the last thing she wanted to do. Inside was Councilman Doherty, and he looked far better than he had in years. Doherty could have passed for a man in his 30s now, not the man who had been staring Social Security age in the face. He smiled at her, and his teeth looked like real teeth rather than the false ones she knew he wore. They rode in silence for a moment, and when he spoke, she could see her apartment building rising up down the street. The council would like to thank you for taking on the role of editor-in-chief of the newspaper. We trust that you'll keep what you saw to yourself. The town runs much better when things run smoothly. We've been running the town for a long time. We know what's best for it. And we are what's best for it. So enjoy your new position, but don't forget how you came to have it. We may reach out from time to time to get you to run certain articles for us. I trust that won't be a problem. What happens if it is? You gonna send your monster after me? Doherty laughed. The Rawson? We could. Who do you think disposed of all those cattle that the Worthy family used to own? Who do you think burned down the bank after Mallory was found unworthy? Sometimes things have to change, and the Rawson is there to make sure that the transition goes as smoothly as possible. This looks like your stop. I trust that we have an understanding, don't we? Selena felt dirty as she watched the car roll away. She'd been bought and paid for, and worse still, there was no one to tell about what she had seen. No one outside the town would really care, and the people inside the town that did care would bury her if she so much as mentioned it. If they did, maybe the Rawson would dig her up, and she could see what the resurrection ceremony was like, firsthand. Really makes you wonder what's in that mud, doesn't it? Coming up next, we have a story of a strange Valentine's Day and a strange suitor who just won't take no for an answer. So let's learn a little more about M'Lady.
I was not at fault here. I don't understand why the universe has decided that I should suffer. As I lay here and listen to his throaty, phlegm-filled breathing, I consider again the idea that ending it might be best. It wasn't my fault. I didn't cause what happened to him. He should have just left me alone. Now I'm the one who must suffer his company, maybe for the rest of my life. The day had started with a hard slap of rocks against my window, and I loosed a loud sigh as I thrust the covers away from me. Every morning. Every goddamn morning. I hadn't had to buy an alarm clock since I moved in, so I suppose that was something. As another handful of stones cascaded against the window, I swung angrily out of bed and shifted the curtains open. I did not open the window right away. You only made that mistake once. The pudgy man-child on the sidewalk had just reared back to throw another handful when he saw the window open and smiled happily. That smile showed me every inch of his yellow teeth, his spotted gums, and the spit that covered his half-rotten teeth in a sheen of translucence. He was dressed in his usual attire, and I imagined I could smell him from 2 floors up. He wore ratty Chuck Taylor sneakers, cargo shorts in February that likely hadn't been washed since his mother had bought them from JCPenney, a ratty black trench coat that covered his grease-stained t-shirt depicting a busty anime girl who seemed overjoyed to be stretched across his voluptuous C-cup breasts, and a wispy beard that made his face look dirtier somehow, and the battered black fedora that capped it all off. This is what he had worn, or some iteration of it, every day since we had first met 2 years ago, and I shook my head as he waved a pudgy hand at me. "Good morning, M'Lady." He knew my name. I'd told it to him 1,000 times, but he always insisted on calling me M'Lady.
"Kenneth, what the hell do you want?"
I was grumpy about being woken up, and sour about Kenneth being the first person I saw 9 mornings out of 10. "Well, I just thought that since we work today, I'd offer to walk you. We're on the same shift again, so just seems like you might appreciate the company." I sighed. I would have appreciated the company. Any company but Kenneth's.
"I'm gonna be a minute, Kenneth. A long minute, so feel free to just go on without me."
I can wait for you. I'll be right here when you get done. When you're ready. Unless you'd rather I wait inside." He snorted through a partially clogged nose. I saw the gleam that came into his piggy eyes and shuddered.
"I'd rather you went on without me, Kenneth, but since there's nothing I can do to stop you from waiting, I suppose you could just wait on the front porch."
I closed the window then, blocking him out and pulling the curtains closed, as I went to get ready for work. Every day. Every goddamn day. I've been living in this townhouse for the last 2 years, and I should have known that the rent was too good to be true. The lady who showed me the house was very complimentary about the neighborhood. She talked about the convenient garbage pickup, the cost-effective water measures she had installed, the proximity to restaurants in downtown, and all at a cost that was nearly half of the other rentals in the area. I had been attending college at the time, the college being about 3 blocks from my apartment, and it had sounded like a real sweetheart deal. I was moving my stuff the first time I met Kenneth. I say met, but I smelled him before I saw him. Have you ever been next to someone on the subway who maybe doesn't shower regularly? The kind of person who covers it up with body sprays instead of just washing their clothes and wearing deodorant. The kind of person you don't really want to stand too close to because their clothes look like they might get grease on yours if they brush up against you. That was what I was assaulted by as this mountain of a man came wandering over to introduce himself. He was dressed in cargo shorts and a t-shirt that day, the July heat too much for even his trench coat to handle, with a pair of sandals that put his yellow toenails on display. I was carrying a box of books inside when I heard him greet me by name. That should have been my first indication that something was afoot. "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Kenneth. My mom said I had a new tenant, but she failed to mention how beautiful she was. Would you like some help?" I had thanked him, but Kenneth's idea of helping seemed to entail watching me move boxes while he talked my ear off about video games, anime, and fantasy roleplay. He was aghast that a girl as worldly as me, whatever that was supposed to mean, had never seen an anime. I admitted that I had watched some Sailor Moon when I was in elementary school, mostly because it was on when I got home. He scoffed at that, though, and waved a pudgy hand at the mention of what he called girly anime. The fact that I didn't play D&D or video games was also a subject he wished to remedy. Thankfully, I had moved all my stuff in by the time he started talking about the third or fourth game franchise, of which he was a super fan, and I thanked him for his help.
I'm going inside to unpack now, so I'll see you.
Ooh, I can help you unpack if you like. I had been standing in the doorway when he said it, the front door the only thing that lay between him and I. The look that crossed his face when he offered to help me unpack was akin to a cat left to guard a mouse. I could just picture his grubby man-child fingers pawing through my clothes, finding some reason to stumble across my underwear, pressing my shirts to his pug nose, and had to stifle a full-body shudder.
On second thought, I'm pretty tired, Kenneth. I think I'm going to rest and unpack tomorrow. Have a good night.
He started to protest, but I closed the door on him and locked the deadbolt. The door had 3 locks, a twist lock, the deadbolt, and the top chain. I engaged all of them before turning around to make something to eat. I had already decided that I would unpack before going to bed today, leaving Kenneth with no excuse to go upstairs and touch any of my things. His annoyance had become creepy pretty quick, and I did not want him hanging around any more than I could help. I had just gotten to the entryway to the small kitchen when I heard an unsettling noise from the front door. I turned and found the doorknob twisting a little, as whoever was on the other side tried to quietly open my door. I thought about seeing who it was, but my fear had a firm grip on me. Home is where you're supposed to feel safest, and that turning knob negated any safeness I might have felt. I couldn't prove it was Kenneth, but I couldn't prove it wasn't. The turning stopped after a few seconds, and I made a mental note to get a chain for the back door, too. The first 6 months were probably the least eventful. I enjoyed my newfound freedom of having my own space, but I definitely noticed some of the strangeness in the house. I would come home to find things moved or find things missing, and I suspected that Kenneth had been in while I was gone. More than once I would catch a whiff of Axe body spray upstairs, a smudge on something that looked like a fingerprint, or just something moved that shouldn't have been. Kenneth came over to hang out a lot, and I quickly got tired of having him around. He was always overly friendly, almost fawningly so, and I began to suspect that he had a crush on me. He brought over anime or his Xbox, and I have spent many evenings reading subtitles or watching him finish some level on a game. He was annoying, but I felt that he was ultimately pretty harmless, and the movies he brought over were sometimes pretty cool. He seemed harmless, if not a little clingy. Anytime I would start to feel the least bit comfortable around him, though, I remembered that look on the doorstep and began to rethink. I gave his mother a key the first time I changed the locks, telling her I suspected an old tenant was using the key to come and go as they pleased. After I found the chain off the back door, something I was zealous about keeping chained at all times, I didn't bother giving her a key. After that, the intrusions stopped. Then, COVID had happened. The city did the lockdown thing, and suddenly all the classes were online, all the functions were canceled, and I was spending more time than usual inside my apartment. During this time, unfortunately, my grades began to suffer. Some people can absolutely take classes online and do fine, but I'm not one of those people. I was one of those popular girls in high school who liked to bask in a place's environment and social structure. Suddenly, having professors that I couldn't talk to face-to-face was hurting my grades. Suddenly, not having peers to talk to review notes with, and to bounce ideas off of was hurting me, and as my grades suffered, the school threatened to take away my grant. The grant was how I paid for housing, so I doubled down and tried to bring them up again. I studied long hours, watched tutorials on YouTube, and read anything that I could find on the subject matter, but nothing seemed to help. Kenneth also did not help with this particular problem. Despite the order to wear masks and social distance, Kenneth was always trying to come over and hang out like he used to. He wasn't in school, all his friends were already online, and neither he or his mother thought this was more than the flu. I don't know how many times I would look through the peephole and find him maskless on my front porch with an anime box set of something or his Xbox waiting for me to hang out. I tried to be nice to him, but as my grades suffered, so did my mental health, and I started ignoring him after a while.
Then, after a horrible semester, my grant was cut, and I was left waiting to re-up next year. That's how we'd come to our current predicament, me working and Kenneth being paid to hang out with me. I came out the front door 45 minutes later to find him sitting on my porch swing, his phone in his hand, and his rocking making the chains grind together annoyingly.
Is that really what you're wearing to work?
It's not like they care. It's Walmart. As long as you show up, they don't care what you have on. He had a point, but I still tried to tune him out as we walked to work together. I had started working at Walmart after my savings started to dwindle. My landlord, Kenneth's mother, cut my rent a little, because of all this pandemic nonsense, she said, with a little scoff. However, it still only floated me another month or so before I needed to get a job. Walmart was hiring, and they needed warm bodies. Kenneth didn't work there right away, but after hearing that I had started working there, he was soon applying for a job as well. Charles, one of my assistant managers, was a gaming buddy of his, and I assumed the source of my constant stock shifts with Kenneth. It was a real toss-up, which one of them I hated more these days. Kenneth was unnaturally quiet on the way to work today. His face had that look that let me know he was thinking about something very hard, and I feared that he would ask me out again. He had asked me out about once a month since I moved in, and I had just started ignoring him, despite his mother's pressure. I got the feeling that she was getting worried about him not leaving the nest, and she hoped that a nice girlfriend would be enough of a mother stand-in to help him get out of her basement and into mine. Sorry, Mama Kenneth, but that dog wasn't hunting in these woods. She could find some other girl to pawn her precious angel off onto. So, m'lady, he said, finally finding his courage, you may have noticed that, Valentine's Day is tomorrow. I rolled my eyes at him theatrically.
It had somehow escaped me after unloading a metric ton of Valentine's Day candy and toys over the past month, Kenneth. But thanks for bringing it to my attention.
Well, I was just wondering if you'd like to be my Valentine this year and go on a date with me tomorrow. I sighed. Every year with this guy.
No, Kenneth. For the 1000th time, no.
Kenneth's face got that look about it that small children get when you tell them no. But why? Don't tell me you already have a date.
Nope, sure don't. I intend to stay in on Valentine's Day since I have the night off.
Well, that's fine. We don't have to go out or anything. We can stay in and rent a movie and maybe cuddle on the couch. And I rounded on him then, my frustration and lack of patience getting the better of me, as I erupted liquid hate all over this yipping puppy of a man.
No, Kenneth, I have told you no 1,000 times, and the answer will always be no. I don't want to date you. I hardly want to be your friend most days. And the thought of you sitting next to me on the couch gives me hives. Move on!
Kenneth just stood there, his face transitioning between barely contained tears and barely contained rage. His mouth seemed like it wanted to say something, but his brain seemed to be holding it at bay. He looked like he was trying to chew himself from the inside out, and the tears seemed to win out in the end. His eyes began to flood with impotent water, the flood falling to his t-shirt as he turned and ran back towards home. He looked like one of those anime characters he loved so much as he fled from his spurning, and I guessed later that might have been his intention. I let him go, making sure he rounded the corner before turning to head to work. Some of us still had bills to pay. I thought that maybe Kenneth would have learned a little something after my outburst, but he clearly hadn't. I got home very late that night to find him sitting on my porch with a heart-shaped box of chocolates. "M'lady," he wheezed, rising ponderously from the seat, "you've returned to home at long last." The look on my face should have told him everything he needed to know about how glad I was to see him. I brushed snow off the shoulder of my jacket and wondered how long he'd been sitting there waiting for me. It had been chilly when I'd gotten to work, but not really uncomfortably so. That had changed quickly over the last 8 hours, and all anyone at work could talk about was the freezing blizzard that was rolling in tonight. The old-timers were saying that the Weather Channel called for 3 feet of snow overnight, and it had already started to powder as I'd left at 10. I had walked back home with only the streetlights to keep me company, a welcome change from the usual yarking in my ear of Kenneth.
Now it seemed I would have to get loud with him all over again.
Yeah, you know why I had to stay so late? It was you. You didn't show up for work, so I had to do your job and my job tonight. I had to stock 2 departments in 8 hours, and then when I couldn't get it done, I had to stay an extra 4 hours and finish your work.
He backed away, holding up the box of chocolates like it was a shield, clearly not receiving the greeting he had hoped for. Yeah, I kind of had a little freak out when you said you wouldn't be my girlfriend, but I realized that once you had the chance to calm down, you'd come to your senses. And we could plan our date for tomorrow. Here, I got you these chocolates. It's kind of late to make a reservation for anywhere, but, He stopped talking when I slapped the box out of his hand, the half-eaten box scattering across my porch.
No, Kenneth, I will not date you. I will not walk with you to work. I'm through pretending to be your friend. Go away and leave me alone. Take a hint, you insufferable man-child. I don't like you, and I don't want to hang out with you.
I walked to the door and keyed it open, blocking it so he couldn't just follow me in. When I turned back to look at him, though, I was a little worried about doing this on the porch. Kenneth was breathing heavily, and I thought for a moment that he might be crying. The breathing was filled with rage, though, and I was suddenly very aware that I was a 5'2" woman yelling at a man who was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed about twice my weight. I suddenly needed to get in the house in a very short amount of time. I needed the door between Kenneth and I. I needed to call his mother, if not the police, and explain to her that her son was on the verge of a restraining order. What the hell is your problem? Kenneth bellowed, and I half closed the door as he turned to let his spittle of rage fly at me. I'm nice to you. I try to be your friend. I bring you gifts. I do everything that a boyfriend does, and you still won't date me. That's not fair. You're supposed to love me. You're supposed to fall in love with me because I do all the things that girls like. I even went and bought the box set of Sailor Moon so we could just sit and watch it together, since I know you like that girly crap. He took a step towards me, and I slammed the door in his face. I had just engaged the deadbolt when he twisted the knob and slammed his full weight against the door, bellowing like a wounded animal.
Go home, Kenneth. Don't bother me anymore, or I will call the police.
He banged on the door a while longer, but I ignored him. When I had finished making myself a bowl of chili, I found that he had stopped pounding on the door. I ate my food, showered, got my clothes ready for tomorrow. On the off chance that we didn't get 3 feet of snow, I would need to go to work tomorrow and deal with Kenneth. He would likely be waiting for me as always, smiling his butter-toothed grin and waiting like an excited puppy for me to come out and play. I was snug in my bed, preparing to sleep, when I heard the music. The music was soft, romantic, and I thought for a moment that it might be something by John Legend. I could hear it coming from right below my window, and I flipped the covers back angrily as I went to have a look. Sure enough, it was Kenneth. He was parked in the snow, a large silver boombox in his hand, and as he lifted it up, bad 80s movie style, I opened the window. We made eye contact, his eyes filled with earnest emotion, and mine filled with nothing but puppy-kicking rage. I opened the window, chill scraping across me.
Go home, Kenneth.
No, Kenneth said. Not until you agree to date me.
You're going to freeze out there.
Then let me in and keep me warm, he said, unable to keep that grin off his face. I just closed the window on him. He'd get cold and go home eventually. The music stopped about an hour later, and I guessed that his batteries had run dry after all that continuous playing. The next morning, I woke up to a sea of white. The snow hadn't been 3 feet deep. The snow had been 5 feet deep, and it spilled over onto my porch when I opened my door that morning. The wind was made of frozen razor blades, the power holding but flickering a little now and then, and I called work to see if I had to be there today. They said that they would be closed for the next few days. They told me to stay safe, and I decided to settle in for a well-deserved couple of days off. I had expected Kenneth to bother me since I was now trapped in my house, but he never came around. I got to enjoy a nice breakfast, and even got to watch some TV, before I was reminded that Kenneth existed at all. The knock came as the laugh track played on my 3rd episode of Friends, and I sighed as I tied my bathrobe so as not to give him any ideas. He would want to come in, pretending like we'd never had a fight yesterday at all, and I would likely have to yell at him again. I was surprised to see that it was Kenneth's mom, Janet, and not her portly man-child when I opened the door. "Hey there," she said, shivering on my porch as she pulled the scarf around her mouth. "I was just wondering if Kenneth was over here." Janet is, quite frankly, the sweetest woman I've ever met. In the 2 years I've been here, she's tirelessly fixed anything that's wrong in the townhouse, brought over food for things like 4th of July or Thanksgiving, and even apologized for Kenneth on more than one occasion. She's like Cartman's mom from South Park. She was a lovely woman, and while aware that her son was a nightmare, there was only so much she could do besides love him.
Not since last night, ma'am.
"Oh dear. Well, I do hope he's okay. He said you two had a little fight yesterday, and he was coming over to try to make up." I gritted my teeth hard enough to hear them creak, but I held in the rage I was feeling so I didn't cook this nice, oblivious lady alive. "Well, if you see him, tell him I was worried, okay?" As she left, I saw that someone had shoveled the sidewalk, and she had made a little path to my door. That was nice of them, but it seemed I really didn't have anywhere to go. The city was buried under snow and basically shut down. It appeared I could be inside for a while, and I decided to settle in and enjoy my time off. The weirdness didn't start till almost sundown. I was making dinner when I noticed a smell hanging around the apartment. I looked around, wondering if I'd forgotten to take the trash out or something. It was a wet smell, with an underlying odor of cologne. It was like someone had tried to cover a mess with deodorizer, and the longer I stood cooking at the stove, the more my head began to ache. The longer I stayed in the miasma, the worse the smell got, and the stir-fry I was making started to swim a little as I cooked it. I ended up eating it a little underdone as I fled the kitchen to the living room. As the swinging door opened, I stopped and basted in the swampy tang of smells from the living room and the kitchen. In the kitchen, it had smelled like funk. In the living room, it smelled like the inverse. Someone had been in my house. Of that I had no doubt. The smell of spray cologne was strong in here, like a pungent wall that surrounded the couch. And as I sat, I could feel something flaking beneath me. It was like sitting in a seat behind a small child, and as I looked, I could see chip crumbs sticking to my pajama pants. They were orange and smelled strongly of Doritos. I set my bowl down as I stood and walked through the house. I could see smudges around the room, especially on my figurines and some of my pictures. Someone with large, greasy fingers had been touching my things, and when I moved past the end of the table near the door, I took up the keychain with the mace on it. The doors were deadbolted, and though I didn't know how Kenneth had gotten in my house, I was certain that he was the source of this. If he thought he could hang out in my house and violate my privacy just to get his rocks off, he had another thing coming. My food was cold by the time I got done, triple-checking every room in my apartment just to be sure. There was nowhere he could have stayed hidden from me, not someone his size, and after spraying some Febreze around, I took my food up to my room and just ate it cold. I felt uncomfortable in the open down there, and as the snow blew and the wind howled, I sat on my bed and listened. At some point, I fell asleep, curling up in my bed as I listened to the silent house around me. When I came to, the lights were off in my room, and the curtains were thrown open to reveal a crystalline moon peeking in. The room was as quiet as the house, but I was aware of a heavy, wet sound as I came awake. It sounded like a dog, one that's been left out in the heat, and I scanned around to find the source of that heavy breathing. My eyes cast around, looking for the noise, and finally settled on a large black spot in the corner of the room. The darkness there was deep, the pitted murk blighted by a pair of small ovals that seemed to reflect the moon. The breathing was coming from there, and as it got heavier, the darkness seemed to shift unnervingly, like someone lurking in the gloom, trying not to be noticed. "M'lady," someone almost whispered, and I was up and across the room in a matter of seconds. I snapped the lights on, hands reaching for anything I could find to defend myself with. I expected to see him much too close as the lights came on. I expected him to bury me under his weight, pushing me down and feeling his hands as he tried to kiss me, to touch me. I gripped the ceramic vase as the lights came on, preparing to swing it and shatter it against his head as he... There was nothing. The lights came on and revealed nothing but an empty room with an anxious girl looking crazily around for an attacker who wasn't there. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat up and argued with myself until the sun came up. I knew what I had seen. I had seen Kenneth in the corner, heard the same deep, watery breathing I had heard 1,000 times. But I couldn't have seen him. Kenneth was a large and stocky fellow. There was no way he could have gotten away in the split second between the lights being off and the lights being on. This wasn't someone who could squeeze under my bed in a split second or slip into my closet without notice. Kenneth often got winded on walks to work, and the idea that he could quickly get out of my sight was laughable at best. Still, he had been there. That whole next day, I saw signs of someone having been in my house. It started as I finally got up for the day. As I came downstairs, I smelled something getting ready to burn in the kitchen. I pulled my robe around myself and quickly pushed into the cloud of smoke that awaited me. On the stove, smoke billowing up, was one of my good pans. I turned the stove off, jerking my hand away as I grabbed the handle of the pan. It was broiling. The burner turned all the way up, and I grabbed an oven mitt and took the pan off the stove. It wasn't until I put it in the sink that I saw a single blackened pancake at the bottom. A heart-shaped pancake. I was scraping the grit from the bottom of the pan when I suddenly heard an all-too-familiar theme song from the living room. The TV had been off when I got up. The lights dimmed to a soft glow. From under the swinging door, I could hear the TV blaring, and the pulse of bright lights clicked up to the max. I pushed in, expecting to find Kenneth parked on my couch, waiting for me with his big serial killer grin and his excuse of how, "Oh, well, the door was open, so he'd come right on in." But there was no one in the living room when I came through the door. There was, however, an indent in my couch, roughly the size of a large someone's backside. I searched the apartment again, already knowing what I would find, but needing the reassurance that I would find it. There was no one, just me, in my apartment. I turned off the TV and cleaned up the mess, waiting till 9 before calling my landlord, wanting to hear her tell me that Kenneth had come home. I wanted her to answer the phone and hear Kenneth in the background as he loudly whined for food or money or something. I wanted the confirmation that he was home, but I also feared it, because if he was home, then what the hell was going on around here? She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello? Hello? Did you find him? Please say you found my baby." I sighed, my hopes shattered.
"No, ma'am. I was just calling to see if he had turned up."
I could hear her sob before telling me that no one had seen him and how worried she was about him, and to please call if I heard anything. I got dressed and decided to sit on the porch for a while, the house suddenly feeling too small for me. I thought I heard some rustling as I slid out of my pajamas and into some real clothes, but I did my best to ignore it as I made some tea and stepped out into the frigid air. The smoke from my tea plumed up as I sat on the swing that Kenneth had occupied yesterday, letting the cold air clear my head as I tried to read the book I had brought with me. The longer I sat, my eyes roving over the winter wonderland in my own yard, the harder it became to maintain my anxiety. I was making too much out of this. Surely I had been imagining things, or a power surge caused by the weather had turned my TV on, or I'd been sleepwalking or something. The more I let the cold wash over me, the more I assured myself that I was just being silly. As noon came and went, the cold beginning to abate and the snow starting to soften, I went back inside. My stomach was growling for some lunch, but the icy chill from outside made me long for a shower first. I had all but forgotten about my trepidation and anxiety, and simply wanted to be warm and snuggly as I enjoyed the rest of my afternoon. I would have a shower, put on some nice pajamas, make the stew I had set the ingredients out for in the fridge, and then head to bed after a nice evening spent at rest. As the warm water cascaded over my skin, I felt the cold dissipate and the leftover anxiety melting away. The shower had always been my safe place, my relaxation zone, and standing beneath the warm deluge made me feel a sense of peace that I'd been missing before the communion with nature. I washed my hair, lathering myself up, and just stood under the water as the soap and my worries slid down the drain. At least, I did, before I felt someone touch my hair. I have long blonde hair, the kind that falls to about the small of my back and must be meticulously maintained so it doesn't look trashy. If I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, there's probably a brush in my hand, and my hair is flipped over my shoulder. I've always been sensitive about my hair, and I don't let people touch it very often. So when someone ran their fingers through my long blonde mass of wet hair, my eyes snapped open, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I had felt the slight tug as 2 or 3 thick fingers slid down and parted the wet locks. I slipped as I stumbled forward, catching myself on the wall before I fell and hurt myself. Through the soupy curtain of foam, I looked around for the source of the touch, expecting to see him. I expected to see a bulbous shape leering at me from behind the curtain. But as I swiped the tangled muck out of my eyes, I was greeted with an empty bathroom. I came shakily out of the shower, hands trembling as I reached for my towel. I was shaken badly. I knew what I had felt. Enough men had tried to touch my hair for me to know what it felt like, and I couldn't trick myself into believing I'd just been imagining things. As I slid back into my clothes, the fog still thick around me, I was met with something even less easy to overlook. Written in the steam on the mirror, the lines reflecting my own horrified face back at me, was the word, "M'lady." I ran, half-dressed from the bathroom, and slipped on the surprise waiting for me in the hall. I went down hard on my backside, bruising my tailbone. The floor was covered with something that my wet feet found slippery, and now that I was on eye level with the floor, I could see them. They had been scattered artfully, leading towards my door in a line of red blotches. The rose petals would have been romantic on any other occasion. At the moment, they left me breathless as I leaned against the wall, watching the door creak slowly open. Behind it, the light in my room dimmed. I could see a thick, softly shadowed form, his eyes gleaming as his tongue slid over his thick porcine lips. I vaguely remember tripping down half the stairs, bruising my legs as I ran for the door. I remember grabbing my phone from the end table by the door, the charging cord coming free as I ran for the porch. I remember talking to the operator, my teeth chattering as I shivered on the porch. My hands and feet were numb, my hair getting stiff from the cold, when the lights lit the icy yard. The sun had started to melt the snow, even as it set behind the nearby houses. The lights on the snow looked odd, almost ethereal, and as they approached, I was thankful when someone threw a blanket over me. One of the officers stayed to take my statement, as the others searched the house. As I told him what had happened, I heard the snow crunch as my landlady came over to see what all the fuss was about. The police came from inside a moment later, shaking their heads and telling me they hadn't found anything. Someone was definitely in there, though. There were rose petals all over your bed and a box of chocolates sitting in the center. Someone had planned quite a romantic surprise for you, though I'm guessing the feeling wasn't mutual. I shook my head and started to tell them about Kenneth's ambush on my porch the night before. But that was when I saw him again. The snow had melted some, and I could see him hunched by the fence line. He was staying still, trying not to be noticed, but I had seen him. His ridiculous black trench coat was a dead giveaway, and I screamed as I pointed at him. His mother looked over my shoulder, pushing me aside as she ran towards her son. I grabbed the rail as I watched her go, the cops chasing after her, wondering why he hadn't moved. The jig was up. We could see him. Why was he just sitting there? When his mother started screaming, and the police officer started calling for an ambulance, I knew something was wrong. That was 2 days ago. He was dead, of course. He had frozen to death, waiting for me to invite him inside. They found the boombox sitting around his feet, frozen to the ground. His coat had been frozen to the back of the fence, and he had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. His mother, of course, was quick to blame me. Why hadn't I let him inside? Why hadn't I called her? And on until the police had finally taken her away. I had taken a few things and gone to stay at a hotel for the night. I just couldn't stay in that house, knowing that there was a dead body in my yard. I thought, at the time, that would be the end of it. They would take his body, and the weirdness would end. Even if his spirit was somehow attached to my apartment, I would just move. His mother wouldn't want me living there anymore anyway, not after I had led to the death of her precious angel. I would just take my things and go elsewhere. When I woke up this morning to find the words "M'lady" written on the bathroom mirror, I knew then that this wasn't attached to my apartment. The haunting had nothing to do with my place at all. He's attached himself to me. Lying here, writing this, I can already hear his raspy, phlegm-filled breath from the corner of the room. It appears that unlike in life, I may be his M'lady after all, unwilling or not.
I know this story pops up a lot, but it really is such a great story, and you really don't get enough Valentine's Day horror, if you think about it. Coming up next, we have a story about a man on a spiritual journey, a hike, a backpack, who meets some people who take him to an odd village where he finds something truly horrifying. So let's hear a story about the sacrifice.
It was my first time backpacking in Europe. I say first because I've been back a few more times. I love to hike, but more than that, I just like going places. If you're not a big hiker, then it might not make sense, but sometimes I like to feel like Frodo as I make my way to Middle-earth to get rid of a ring. Sometimes I'm with people, sometimes I just go by myself, but nothing beats the feeling of seeing the world on your own two legs in a backpack, full of whatever you could cobble together at the time. Europe is a pretty great place to backpack in general. It's very accommodating, and most of the places you'll want to go to have a hostel where you can stay for cheap. You never know what kind of people you're going to see there either, which has led me to sleeping with my backpack and splurging on a small padlock for any of the zipper pockets it might have. I don't want people rifling through it. Most of the people you meet are fine, other backpackers, tourists, travelers from one place or another, but you do encounter drug addicts sometimes and the mentally ill, so it's best to come prepared. Backpacking teaches you to sleep lightly, how to travel light, and how to pace yourself so you don't burn out on the side of the road after a full day of traveling. Something else that backpacking and hiking taught me was how to read a map. After my first hiking experience, I never traveled anywhere without a clearly defined map again. I'd been hiking in Europe for about a month. The first time I went, it was one of the hostels where I met a group of young men who said they were from Germany. They were hiking around on the border between France and Germany, and they were going in roughly the same direction that I was, so I decided that I'd go with them. They kept talking about this quaint little town that they wanted to visit, and they said I should come with them because it was something to be seen. It was coming up on December, and it was really starting to get cold. Too cold for serious hikers. I'd meant to be back in civilization for the colder months of winter, but I'd found myself following these three fellows for longer than I meant to. They assured me that they did this often, and that the place they were taking me was something to see, so I decided to go with them. What the hell, right? You only live once. Can't tell you where the village is, mostly because I'm not really sure myself. The guys I was traveling with knew more about the region than I did, and I wasn't as good at map reading back then as I would become. Also, they had a pretty good amount of alcohol with them, and they were not adverse to sharing it. They kept me fairly sloshed most of the way to wherever we were going, and looking back, I wonder if their intentions were entirely friendly. I was too drunk to think about it at the time, but I remember catching them talking in that hurried German that I was never able to really follow as they looked or pointed at me. I know a little German. I'd be a fool to travel through Europe without knowing a few pieces of the language, but my German wasn't as good as my French, and my French is nowhere near as good as my Spanish. I tell you this so that you'll know that I picked up a few words, but I was never what you would call fluent in the language that they kept slipping into and talking about me. I remember it was December 1st when we made it to the village. I only remember that because it was one of the guys' birthdays, and they made a big deal about it at breakfast, so I guess it stuck in my head. It was just before lunchtime when we came to the border, and it was like stepping into a time machine. This would have been around 2001, 2002, so it was still what you would consider to be modern times, but the people I saw working the fields looked like they might be from the 1800s or something. They were plowing their fields with oxen, turning down the old growth as they got the field ready for planting next year. They were dressed in homemade dresses and hand-stitched overalls, the women sporting actual bonnets. They looked up as we passed, and I saw a few of them hold their children tight, like they thought we might try to steal them. The kids were in a collection of clothes that made them look like miniature adults, and it reminded me of visiting the Amish country when I was a kid. We came into the village, and it looked like something from a postcard. Everything was all cobblestones and handmade bricks and glass that looked like it had been made by an artisan. They drew their water from a well, and there was an honest-to-God market in the middle of the square where people were selling their wares. I saw an awful lot of pine boughs and decorations, and I wondered if we had arrived in time for some sort of festival. I asked one of the German guys, and he nodded and said, yeah, a lot, before turning back to his friends and continuing to talk in that low, quick German. The only word I kept catching that day was special and barter, but I didn't really understand. There was another word, safe passage, but it made even less sense. We were heading not far in, but there was a large house in the middle that had to be a meeting hall or a town hall. People were getting out of the way, looking at us like we might have a disease or something, and I noticed two of my friends had gotten behind me as if they thought I might try to make a run for it. There was no chance of that. I was absolutely enchanted by the place. It was like slipping into some German fairy tale, and I was taking pictures with my disposable camera and waving at people like an idiot. That German fairy tale analogy would come back to me later, and I would come to understand how fitting the comparison had been. We walked into the town hall, or meeting hall, or whatever it was, and I saw a handful of people clustered around a large wooden chair by the fire. There was an old man sitting on that chair, his legs hiked up over the armrest, and one of them looked like it was twisted from a fall or something. He seemed to be holding court, like he was a baron or a burgermeister or something. And as my new friends came up with me to the old man, he told the crowd to depart and pointed at us. My new friends bowed to him, dipping their heads low, and pointed to me as they started talking in that quick, fast German again. I picked up on the word safe passage, and then they said another word that I recognized, something that meant offering. I got a little nervous then. I'd heard stories about human trafficking and drug trade, but you never think that you're gonna be involved in something like that. It's such a picturesque German village, after all. The old man looked at me briefly, his face scrunched up in indifference, and then he said something to the three men, and I picked up a little bit of it. He told them they had arrived too late, and something had already been selected for something. Then he said some other stuff, and the general tone was that they were welcome, but he couldn't do anything for them. The three men deflated, looking bummed out, but not altogether upset. They looked like kids that had come in second place in some contest, and when one of them turned back to me and clapped me on the shoulder, I felt a sense of relief somehow. He says we're welcome, and we're more than welcome to stay for the festival if we like. I told him that sounded great, and the whole atmosphere shifted after that. The old man came out on the front porch, slow under the power of one slightly twisted leg, and told the people that we were welcome, and that we had his blessing to stay for the celebration. The people cheered, and we were immediately welcomed in a way that I'd never experienced before. It was like someone had flipped the switch in them, and suddenly all four of us were being patted on the back and having our hands shook and our necks hugged. They gave us food and shelter, fresh clothes and baths, and when they served dinner in the square, we were placed near the head table in a spot of honor. There was a lot of dancing, the whole town really turning out for whatever this was, and when I asked one of the guys what we were celebrating, he smiled and seemed to think about the best way to explain it. This is... and then he said a word that I didn't have any hope of understanding, before he added, the celebration of tribute. It is a yearly rite that the people undertake, and when they leave offerings to the new year, so that their crops will be good. Offerings, I asked, as I took another sip from my beer. Like animal sacrificing? I didn't think anybody still did that. Oh, yes, the man said, and he nodded solemnly. There are many people in the surrounding area who still keep to the old ways. This village is one of them, and it is the reason that they still live in this manner. There is no electricity, there's no technology, there is no mass production or preservation. They live simply, and as such are protected from the horrors of the outside world. I didn't fully understand what he was talking about, but the food was good, and the celebration was something to be seen. I danced with a few dozen village girls. I was invited to sing a few times with the band. I was given food and drink till I thought I might burst, and I'd be lying if I said a couple of those girls didn't follow me to bed by the end of the day. It was an amazing time, probably one of the best trips of my life, but there was one person who did not appear to be having a good time. She was hard to miss. She sat beside the old man at every feast, and her stark white dress stood out against the rough spun and leather that the others wore. She didn't seem to eat much, even though I heard the village elder coaxing her in a less than friendly voice. She mostly just sat there, with her hands in her lap, and stared disinterestedly at her plate. I asked one of my new friends who she was, and when he looked at her, his smile slipped right off his face. She is the bride of Winter. I didn't know Winter had a bride, I slurred, mostly drunk when I plucked up the courage to ask. Oh yes, every year a bride of Winter is chosen, and then she is taken by the Green Man to be his lover for the year. What's a Green Man? The Green Man is the protector of the area, but he asks a high price for that protection. He's given tribute, he is given an offering, and he ensures the crops are good and the winter is mild. When the tribute or the offering is bad, the Green Man may be infuriated and send a blizzard down upon the village, which will kill or injure many of those who live here. They are always very careful what they leave and what they select to give to the Green Man, because his wrath can be quite deadly. I was too drunk to really process it at the time, and I just shook my head and laughed as I went back to whatever it was I'd been eating. It appeared I wandered into a group of superstitious peasants who were playing at South Seas Cannibals. Whatever, I was a guest, and I wasn't going to tell them how to run their village. We stayed there for a whole week, eating and drinking and making merry, and when Sunday came, we sat on the second story of the inn and watched a procession go off towards the church with the girl in white in tow. Her head was bowed, and her hands were over her stomach, the poor girl leading the procession of villagers towards a large Gothic church at the edge of town. Not all of them went, though. I could see a small group of them building some sort of altar in the town square. They had large rocks, and they seemed to be trying to stack them in a vaguely geometric way. Once they had arranged them to their liking, they began putting food on them and other offerings. They left trinkets and baubles, animal pelts and trophies, food, drink, all manner of other things, but there was a large spot left open in the middle, and it seemed to be on purpose. I wondered who or what was going to go in that spot, but, of course, I think I knew. I think I'm going to go have a nap, I told my new friends at about 2 in the afternoon. You will miss all the festivities, one of them said, and he seemed genuinely sorry about it. I won't be asleep for long. Wake me up when they do whatever it is they're going to do down there. I don't want to miss it. I had been wrong on that account, and I was too foolish to know it. I slept later than I meant to, and when someone shook me awake, it was past dark. I don't know how I had managed to sleep through whatever was going on outside, but as I came to myself, I heard a lot of screaming and a lot of moaning from outside the inn. Torches were burning, people were calling out to someone, and the whole atmosphere was like something you'd see in a house fire. It was one of my new friends, and he was shaking me and telling me that we had to go. He was looking over his shoulder like he expected the town to come after them, but it was just the two of us in the room that they had given us at the inn. Go? What do you mean? We have to go to the thing tonight, don't we? There will be no tribute tonight. She has run away, and no one can find her. We must go before he arrives. Why can't they just find another one? It is too late for all that. The girl has been cleansed and prepared for 7 days. They cannot take another tribute in time, and when he arrives and discovers that she is gone, he will be wroth. I nodded, not really understanding, and got my stuff together. We went downstairs to find the other two sitting at the bar, fully packed and ready to go. They were drinking, but they looked anything but merry. They passed a mug of thick brown ale to me and told me to drink so that the cold wouldn't eat my bones. I took a few sips, more chewing it than drinking it, and as we prepared to go, I heard something different wash over the town. It wasn't something I heard, though that's the only word that makes any sense. The town went from a state of absolute cacophony to dead silent in a matter of seconds. It was as if someone had simply turned the sound off on whatever was going on outside. I remember snapping my fingers next to my head to make sure I hadn't gone deaf. All three of them jumped and looked at me like I was insane, telling me to get down below the window and not make a sound. I asked them why, asked them what was going on, but they said it was too late and that he had arrived. We had to get low, and we could not be seen, or else we might not make it out alive. I tried to ask them what the hell they were talking about, but one of them put a hand over my mouth and shook his head. That's when I became aware of the only sound in the world at that moment. That's when I heard it, the light, almost playful hoofbeats of a large horse. It came slowly up the road outside the hotel, taking its time, absolutely in no hurry. Whoever was riding it did not seem to be in any rush, and beneath the sound of hooves, I could hear the light, irritating sound of metal scraping together. Was someone sharpening a knife? It sounded like two pieces of metal rubbing together. But when I made to look out the window, my new friends pushed me down and put a finger to my lips. The horse passed right in front of the hotel, and when it was gone, I was still not allowed to get up. One of them whispered to me that if he saw us, we would all die, and I decided to take his word for it. I was suddenly terrified, a deep cold making its way across my bones and skin that went far deeper than frostbite. It felt like I'd been trapped out in the cold for hours, and I'm not sure I could have stood up if I wanted to. I heard the horse as it came to a stop in the center of town, and when I heard the old man speak to someone, I was chilled again at how absolutely terrified he sounded. "My lord, you honor us with your presence." He sounded as if he were anything but honored. He sounded as if he were absolutely about to wet himself. When whatever it was spoke, I felt like the stew I had eaten for lunch might be about to turn to concrete in my stomach. The voice was like something coming up out of a well. It was a deep, resonant tone, cultured but feral, something you heard out of the pits of hell on a quiet night. "Where is my tribute?" "My lord, the girl was young and foolish. She has run into the woods and we cannot find her. I apologize. You know how these children are. They do not understand the old ways, and so often The horse's hoof came down a single time, and the village elder was silent. "I will ask again. Where is my tribute?" The village elder was silent for a long heartbeat. and when he answered, I was impressed by his resolve. "She is gone, my lord. I offer myself as tribute, if you will take me. Please, I beg you, spare our village. These people have done nothing wrong, and they should not have to pay for the faithlessness of children." I heard something come free of his scabbard, a loud, angry kiss of metal as it escaped its holder. I imagined it was a large sword, but as I found my legs and peeked up over the rim of the window for the briefest of moments, I saw it was an axe. There was a man dressed all in mossy green armor, sitting atop a skeletal horse that was bigger than any horse that emaciated had a right to be. He had his back to me, his helm beset with deer antlers, and the old man who was their chief was standing before him as if this was a battle he meant to fall in. He had dropped his cane, and the twisted leg must have been hurting him badly. Regardless, he stood strong before the man, and as my friends pulled me back down below the window ledge, I heard a sound like a butcher's cleaver going through meat. Then came the sound of that said meat hitting the ground, and it wasn't alone. He reared up on the back of that horse, loosing a frightening cackle as he began to cut into the others that were assembled there. He sliced them with that cruel axe, but before that I heard a winter blizzard hit the windows so suddenly that I fell backward onto the floor. The windows were covered in a thick frost in a matter of seconds, and amidst the screams of the townspeople who had gone to stand with their elder, I could hear the whipping, biting wind as it hit the side of the inn, hard enough to rock it in its frame. My new friends and I scrambled across the floor, trying to find shelter before the windows burst. We found the entrance to the wine cellar, and as we stumbled down the stairs, we pulled the door shut behind us. Despite our cover, the slaughter went on outside. I couldn't hear it, not over the wind, but we could see it the next day. Whoever their patron was, he was cruel indeed. We spent that whole night shivering in the stone cellar amidst the casks, and when daylight peeked out through the windows at street level, we decided it might be safe to venture out. It took several tries to get the front door open, but when it finally came loose of its icy hinges, we could see that Main Street was covered in frost. Not just frost, thick black ice that would have looked more at home on the pavement of any American city during this time of year. Some of the bodies we found had been cut down, but some of them had simply crumpled to the ground and been frozen where they lay. The old man had been cut in half, his top half frozen onto the altar, in the spot where the tribute would have stood. I'm sure some of the people lived, but all those we found that day were dead. They had been hacked apart, or ridden down, or simply died of exposure. And my new friends told me that we needed to leave before the townspeople that were left came looking for retribution. Retribution? We didn't do anything, I told them, as we made our way out of town. It doesn't matter. We're outsiders. They will not care if we cause the Green Man's fury or not. They will want to make sacrifice to him, so it doesn't happen again. And the outsiders always go first. We left town in a hurry, and when we made it to another little village near the border of France, they took me to the train station and told me to make my way back to civilization. They apologized for taking me to the village, saying they should have known better. They wished me safe travels, and when we parted ways, I never saw any of them again. Never really wanted to after that night. I wonder how close I came to sitting on that altar and being a tribute that was given to the Green Man. It's made me wary when I hike, and a little more cautious about the company I keep. Also, I don't hike in the winter months anymore. Feeling the cold on my skin and smelling the frost in the air always makes me think of that little village where so many people died, and it makes me wonder if the Green Man might be stalking me still.
One more story for you, and I promise we've got a pretty good one to go out on. It's a Halloween tale, a tale about tales. a tale that gets a little too real. So let's hear a tale about the Whistler.
When I was a kid, I had a pretty typical suburban childhood. White picket fences, ticky-tacky suburban houses, endless concrete for my friends and I to ride our bikes on, and the only strangers we saw were the occasional drifters or travelers that wandered through our town. My dad worked at the steel mill. My mom was a homemaker. I remember afternoons off from school filled with bike rides and trips to the arcade, Boy Scout meetings, and exploring Stokes Woods that lay just off the secluded neighborhood we all lived in. Stokes Woods was where my friends and I had so many firsts. It was honestly the first bit of real freedom we had. We spent summer days exploring, making maps and setting up camps that would be found later to our great amusement. It was our first brush with death, too, finding birds or animal carcasses on the trail. We poked at them with sticks and oohed at the bugs that crawled out. We never guessed that one day we might share their fate. I was in the woods the first time I swore, yelling, "Damn it!" as I skinned my knee when I was 8. I was in those woods the first time I saw a naked lady, the glossy pages of Terry's dad's Playboy gripped in my sweaty hand as we sat around the campfire when we were 11. It hosted my first camping trip. It was the first place I was allowed to camp alone. Well, with Terry and Reggie, but it was our first time out alone at night. It was also where we found the treehouse. The treehouse was a relic of kids gone by. It was in a big old tree set into a clearing, a fire pit dug in its shadow. It had a dumbwaiter to pull things up, and a rope ladder to climb up through a trapdoor. It was built in pieces. There was a wall inside with the signatures of kids who had added to it, complete with dates when they had completed them. When we came across it one afternoon, our 9-year-old eyes grew big with wonder. We knew we had found something special that day. Over the next few weeks, we replaced the rope ladder, cleaned out the fire pit, and replaced the dumbwaiter rope. We painted it too, finding some paint at the junkyard and painting the faded treasure in a wash of purple and brown and gold. We added a bike rack, again with the wood from the junkyard, and signed our names and dates on the wall when the project was done. The easy trip to and from the junkyard made me believe that the treehouse might have been constructed from the things they found there. We asked Old Man Macy, the caretaker, and he said that kids had been coming and going from the dump for years. He said every few years some kids would come along and take wood and pipes and things for special projects they did out in the woods. He was honestly glad they had been putting it to good use. We'd been playing and camping and using the treehouse for a couple of years when Terry suggested a Halloween sleepover. "It's on a Friday. We can camp out in the treehouse and eat candy and tell scary stories." I thought it sounded like a great idea, and my parents agreed. 3 kids alone in the woods may seem weird to some of you, but the town we lived in was pretty rural. Our town had a population of about 1,200, and crime was almost non-existent. Besides the odd traveler that sometimes blew through, you knew your neighbors pretty well. We had camped in the woods for the last 2 years, and the Boy Scouts had taught all of us how to camp safely and not burn down the woods. That night, we all hit the street as soon as the lamps came on. We set out with our pillowcases in hand and embarked on a sweet journey to collect the most candy. As always, we had a theme, and we were all dressed as the Avengers when we went out trick-or-treating. I was Hawkeye, bow slung over my shoulder, handmade costume and cheap mask covering my eyes. Reggie was the Hulk, body painted green and absurd rubber hands over his real ones. Terry was Captain America, his store-bought costume topped off by a trash can lid that he had painted a star on. We moved from house to house, striking poses and delighting adults as they filled our pillowcases with candy. By the time the porch lights started going out, we had bulging sacks ready to burst from all the candy we'd gotten. We stopped at our homes, dropping off a little excess candy and getting our camping stuff. We told our parents where we were going, and my mom kissed me goodnight and told me to come straight home if there was an emergency. And with that, we set off. We walked the familiar trails into the woods. Our backpacks were bulging with our candy sacks, and the night was lit by a full and ghostly moon. Terry and Reggie talked excitedly about the candy, wanting to tell ghost stories as we ate it. But I kept getting distracted. I could swear there was a noise out in the woods, a bird or a high-pitched wind. As we moved towards the treehouse,
It seemed to follow us. The other two were oblivious, but the sounds made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It came closer and closer, never quite reaching us, but seeming to pass us sometimes. I heard it behind us, heard it in front of us, and how the others could remain oblivious of it was beyond me. When the treehouse rose up to greet us, it was a real relief. In the light of the full moon, though, it looked ghostly and strange. I had thought the noise would cease to be an issue once we arrived, but it only seemed to get worse. As we loaded our bags on the dumbwaiter, I could swear the whistling still surrounded us. I rushed them a little, gaining some grumpy looks, but I wanted to be out of the woods and into the safety of the treehouse. Once we were safe inside, lanterns on and candy spilled on the floor, I began to feel at ease. This was our sanctuary. Nothing bad could happen to us here. We were children who had yet to experience loss or any real trauma. We were secure in our knowledge that our parents would still protect us from anything, no matter how bad it got. We were foolish, but children are supposed to be foolish, I guess. Reggie was halfway through one of his full-size candy bars the Hudsons had been passing out when Terry suggested we start the ghost stories. Terry loved scary stories, and he usually had a pretty good collection of them from the internet or wherever. Reggie pulled a beanbag chair over from the corner, and I dragged a camp chair over so I could join the group of lanterns. Typically, we would tell our stories around the fire pit, but I think we all sensed that tonight it would be better to be inside. Halloween was unique somehow. It was best to be inside after dark. Terry brought the flashlight up under his chin, tilting the light knob down on the lantern and grinning at us ghoulishly. "This is a true story. I swear it on my life," he said, before beginning his story. He told us a story about a kid plagued by the ghost of a hobo that he and his friends had accidentally killed. They had been playing a trick on him, and he had choked to death on a sandwich. After he died, the boy kept seeing him around, in windows or on street corners, but his friends hadn't believed him. Then, while the boys were at a sleepover, the ghost struck. I found myself distracted as he told the story, though. The wind blew against our treehouse, creaking it in the branches of the old tree. But beneath the wind, there was a weird sound. That same whistling was coming from outside, a high-pitched keening that was not altogether tuneless. As I listened to it, it almost seemed to move through the surrounding trees as Terry wove his tale. Terry came to the end of his story, and the boy's friends died badly. The boy escaped the sleepover and ran for his home. The ghostly hobo dogged his heels, screaming his name as he chased him through the quiet streets. But the boy had made it home and slammed the door in his rotting face. He had leaned against it, safe at last, but as the banging began, he remembered one important fact. His parents were gone, Terry said, grinning in the flashlight beam. He might have made it home, but he was still at the mercy of the ghostly apparition. Terry told us how the door had bowed inward, the ragged hands pushing the wood like wax paper, but I felt my attention dragged away again. I could still hear the whistling, closer now, and I could swear there was another noise too. Rustling leaves maybe, or leaves crackling underfoot. Was someone outside the treehouse? And as Patches pushed at his door, trying to catch him, the boy snuck out the window and disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. Terry seemed to notice then that I wasn't really paying attention. "Oh, come on. That was a great story." "Huh?" I asked. Oh yeah. Something was just distracting me outside. Reggie looked quizzically at me. What was it? I thought I heard someone outside moving around in the leaves. Terry turned to look at the bare window, and Reggie walked over to look out into the inky blackness. The moon cast an odd light over his face, but as he scanned the ground, it gave away no sudden surprise. He shrugged his already broad shoulders and returned to his beanbag chair. He reached for a candy bar and started unwrapping the silvery foil. "Nothing there," he said after Terry and I stared at him for a second. "Must have been the wind." Terry had begun another story about a shadowy creature that lived in a stairwell. As he laid out the narrative, though, I could hear the whistling again. It wormed into my consciousness, spinning through the trees outside like a drunken bird. I could hear the leaves crunching again, the wind making them rustle like skeletal wind chimes. And suddenly, I too wanted to go to the window and look out into the night. I was trying to listen to Terry's story, but the more I tried to pay attention to it,
the more I heard the noises from below. Terry looked miffed when I interrupted his story to drag up the rope ladder. I latched the hatch and came back to find him with his arms crossed and an indignant look on his face. "Think you can do a better story? Well then, hotshot, have at it." He tossed the flashlight at me, and I caught it by reflex. I thought about it for a minute and realized I did have a story I could tell. Maybe by getting it out, I could alleviate the fear that had been consuming me. I was ruining my Halloween campout, and for what? Some noise outside the treehouse? It was probably just a raccoon or something that we had spooked when we arrived. My unease had given me the perfect story, though. So, these 3 kids were walking in the woods. They were going camping, and were going to a familiar spot in the woods to set up. They left their homes at dusk, wanting to camp out under the stars in just their sleeping bags. Their parents told them that if anything went wrong, they could come home and sleep there. But the boys had done this 100 times, and felt that they knew the woods like the back of their hand. They felt like nothing in the woods could surprise them. But they were wrong. Terry sneered, but he sat close to the lantern and listened nonetheless. Reggie opened another candy bar, the story drawing him in as the stories almost always did. Reggie didn't really seem to like scary things. He was kind of a fraidy cat. But he liked stories. He would sit and listen, getting more and more terrified, but always beg for another when you were done. They walked towards the determined campsite, talking animatedly about the s'mores they would make and the scary stories they would tell. One of them kept hearing something as they walked. He could hear a snap of a twig, the crunch of a leaf, and it made him wary. He told his friends, but they shrugged it off as nothing. It was late afternoon, the sun was setting, and the animals were coming out to forage. They were probably just hearing animals moving around in the dry leaves. The 2 of them went back to walking, talking between themselves, but the third kept listening, kept looking over his shoulder to see what lay behind. Terry and Reggie were paying attention, Terry a little begrudgingly. Reggie's eyes were large and starey as he listened. As I told the story, I almost thought I could hear the leaves crackling outside, the wind in the trees rattling the dying year's foliage against the limbs, and a low whistle could be heard outside. It was tuneless and wafting as it warbled across my sanity. I knew just what was stalking these kids through the woods as I began to spin their tale. He kept asking them to listen, telling them it was important, but they wouldn't listen to him. They kept walking, kept talking, and all the while the crunching leaves and the rustling of limbs followed them, getting closer and closer. The boy became afraid. The steps sounded large, but he couldn't see anything in the trees as they proceeded down the trail. One of the others finally yelled at him, telling him to stop being stupid and just enjoy the trip. There was nothing out there. No one but he could hear it. He was being dumb. He needed to relax. I paused for dramatic effect, seeing Terry roll his eyes at the description of the boy in the story. That's when they heard the whistling. And I imagined I could still hear the whistling outside the treehouse. It was getting closer and closer as I told the story. Was the story drawing it in? Was I calling it to the treehouse? But by now, though, I couldn't stop myself. The story needed to be told, and I had become a conduit for it. I would tell it to the end, even if the whistler came right up the tree after us. They all froze when they heard the whistling. This was no wind through the boughs of a tree. This was a tuneless, monotonous whistling that cut across the dying afternoon like a sickle through wheat. It was behind them, seemingly on the trail, and they could hear it getting closer and closer. They began to make their way towards the campsite, walking a little faster, but all 3 looked over their shoulder now. They were all made uneasy by the whistling, and they all wanted to put some distance between themselves and it. My friend sat forward, hanging on my every word, entranced by this new development. Outside, I imagined I could hear the whistling coming from just outside the clearing. They didn't talk anymore. They didn't laugh. They didn't joke. They let their feet take them ever onward, but the whistling followed them. The friends who had insisted it was nothing said that maybe they should speed up a little bit. The campsite couldn't be far. Once they were there, they could take a side trail and get back to town.
or whatever it was might leave and they could get back to their campout. The other two agreed, but all of them knew that the campout was already canceled. None of them would sleep here tonight, not willingly. They sped up, but the whistling followed them steadily. One of them said that they should stop and confront the whistler. He must be human. Who else could whistle? The other two shot him down, though. The whistling was discordant, jangling against their nerves, sounding like nothing they had ever heard before. Both agreed that they didn't want to find out what whistled like that, and they kept moving. Something bumped the bottom of the tree, but my audience didn't seem to notice. It wasn't a hard bump. It didn't shiver the whole tree. It felt more like an inquisitive tap, a gentle knock, someone trying to get our attention. I put it out of my mind, maybe the wind or something, and kept telling my story. They kept moving, deeper and deeper into the woods, all the time being chased by the whistling. They broke into a run, the campsite still not coming into view, and still the whistling grew closer and louder. The whistling took on a life of its own, rising and falling in its chaotic tune as it became less and less discernible. The children put their hands over their ears, the noise scraping against their mind like a rusty scalpel. The hands would not block out the whistling, though. They heard it inside their heads as it battered their senses, and when the first one tripped, the other two did not stop to help him. They didn't hear his screams, but they felt a change when the whistling thing got him. A night bird called out from the forest, but now the whistling was in my own head, and I only registered it as something different. I told the story frantically, hoping it would stop the whistling in my head somehow. They dropped their packs and ran. They sprinted, flat out, knowing that the trail must be up ahead. They would round the bend, and there it would be. It would be there, as it always had been, and they would cut back towards town. It never occurred to them that the creature could just cut through the forest after them. The trail to town had a talismanic effect on them. If they could make it, then they could walk it, and then they would be safe. They ran, they wept, but the whistling followed them on and on, their feet crunching against the leaves and pine needles, sounding like gunfire, but they hardly noticed over the eerie whistling in their heads. My two friends were leaning close now, the lantern making their faces look like jack-o'-lanterns as their eyes begged for the climax. And still, that whistling assaulted me, threatening to drive me mad. If they noticed it, they gave no indication. When the second boy fell, the first never noticed. He ran and ran, trying to outdistance the whistling, trying to get it out of his head, and when his friend was found, the whistling again took on a different note. The lone boy ran and ran, hoping to outdistance the crazed whistling, knowing that his fate would be the same as his friend's if it caught him. Some say he runs to this very day. Some say the whistling got him in the end. No one knows for sure. I heard the whistling abate a little. It didn't leave, but it did lighten slightly. I felt like crying as I came to the end of my story. Maybe I would be allowed to live where the boys had died. The search parties found their backpacks 2 days later, animals having worried at them to get at the food that was inside. They found the campsite bare, no fire having been lit in weeks. Of the boys, they found no sign. No trace was ever found. Not a scrap of clothes, not a footprint. They were never seen again, but the children in the area say that you can hear the whistling in the woods on quiet nights. On those nights, it's best to stay indoors. The whistling takes all who venture too close, and the whistling will haunt you for the rest of your life, however long that may be. That was when the whistling stopped. It stopped so abruptly that I wondered if it had ever been there at all. For a 10-year-old to question his mental stability was a strange feeling, but at that moment, I was just glad it had passed me by. The other two shook off their rapture, looking as though they had been hypnotized, and Terry blew out a long breath. Well, damn, that was a good story. I can't top that, and suddenly I'm feeling kind of tired. Yeah, Reggie said dreamily. Me too. I think maybe we should go to bed. I would have argued with them on most nights, but tonight I was as drained as the rest. We laid out our sleeping bags and burrowed down, dropping off quickly without the usual chatter that preceded it. I'd like to tell you that that's where the story ends. I wish I could, but that wouldn't be doing justice to the memory of my friends. I awoke in the wee hours of the morning when someone threw a pillow at me. It was not thrown playfully. The throw was hard, angry, and directed at my face. I sat up, rubbing my cheek, and became aware of the keening whistle that had returned. It was louder than ever, and it chilled me to the bone. "For God's sake, stop it!" Tera yelled, staring daggers at me. "Your story was good. We all said so. But trying to scare us with that stupid whistling isn't funny." I heard someone crying and looked over to see Reggie in the corner with his hands against his face. The whistling was loud and discordant, just as I had described it in my story, and it appeared that I wasn't the only one that could hear it now. Tera looked madder than I had ever seen him, and Reggie was clearly terrified after the story I had spun. "It's not me, I swear," I told them. Tera glanced at me for a few seconds before realizing that I was right. He had woken me up. How could I be the whistler? He moved to the window and I joined him, trying to see the source of the whistling. Most nights we would have nothing to see but the inky blackness, but under the light of the full moon, the yard was shadowy but visible. As we scanned the yard, we could see little. The fire pit below, the logs we sat at as we toasted our marshmallows and wieners, the woodpile we had tarped against the rain. I had almost decided to go check the other window, when Tera gasped like a stepped-on cat. I looked and saw a man in a long cloak step out of the tree line. He was dressed in a dark gray coat, long and flowing like a trench coat, and a tall cowboy hat, making him look almost 7 feet tall as it poked towards the sky. The toes of his pointy boots poked from beneath the coat, and I thought they looked battered and scuffed even from here. The wind seemed loath to touch him, but by the way he pulled the cloak around him, you'd have thought he was freezing. I could see a pair of eyes reflecting the moonlight as they looked up at us, and decided that he must be wearing glasses. Of him, we could see very little under the cloak, but he made us uneasy. The whistling seemed to be coming from beneath the cloak, and when it stopped, he began to speak, and I wished for the whistling again. His voice was raspy, pinched, croaksome, a dead man's pleading last words. "It's so cold, boys. Might I take shelter in your treehouse for the night?" I shuddered, not knowing what to say. Somehow, though, Tera found his voice. "Go away. Our mother told us not to talk to strangers, and we don't know you." "Please, boys, kind boys. Didn't your mother teach you hospitality? Let an old man in out of the cold," he pleaded. "No," Tera said, and moved away from the window as though the man might somehow leap through it. The man didn't yell. He didn't plead. He just sat on the log beneath our tree and continued to whistle. The jagged cords wafted up into the treehouse, and I saw Tera shudder. He picked up a boot that had been part of my costume and went to the window to throw it at the man. Tera sent it sailing, but hissed when it didn't connect. He threw several other things at the whistler, but the old man never seemed to be where he was aiming. Tera cussed loudly, reaching for the lamp. I wrapped my arm around it, begging him not to. "It's all the light we have, Tera. Please." He tore it out of my hand, growling as it came free. He chucked it at the old man, the heavy plastic thing not even getting close to the target. It broke on the ground, shattering and fizzling with an electric pop. The inside of the treehouse was darker for its passing, the three of us now sitting in near darkness. The whistling went on, though. The man never seemed to run out of breath, and the shrill noise took its toll on all of us. Reggie began to rock in the corner, sobbing loudly as the man whistled and whistled below. Tera screamed at him from the window, his rage never ending, as I covered my ears and tried to keep the threads of my sanity together. It seemed to last for hours, for days, and as I sat with my eyes closed, I prayed it would end. When I heard the floorboards creak, I opened my eyes. It was Reggie standing by the window, his foot already on the ledge. "Reggie? What are you doing?" I breathed, half getting up. Reggie looked back at me,
snot runners creeping down his face. His naked face looked tortured, tears cutting lines down his dirty cheeks, still streaked with green. He smiled gruesomely at me as he framed himself in the window, and I didn't have to ask what he intended to do. I tried to stop him. I pulled myself up from the floor to go to him, but it was already too late. I just want it to stop, he breathed, before throwing himself out the window. We never heard him hit the ground over the loud and terrible whistling. Terry stormed over to the hatch and had it unlatched before I could throw myself across it. What are you doing? What do you think I'm doing? I'm gonna go do something about this guy. He's an adult, Terry. You can't do anything to him. Get out of my way. I'm going out there. He's scary, Terry. You shouldn't go out there. You'll end up like Reggie. Terry kicked me, sending waves of pain through my guts, and I rolled off the trap door. I heard him throw it open and toss the ladder down, descending in a shriek of rage as he made his way towards the Whistler. As scared as it had made Reggie, the Whistler had made Terry a furious juggernaut. I drew myself up, my ribs hurting as I hobbled to the trap door. I looked down before closing it and gasped in horror against my throbbing chest. The man was at the bottom of the ladder. His face was still hidden by the coat, his eyes a glistening twosome amidst the swirling dark void, and I could see thick red fluid around the collar of that cloak. He was 2 rungs up the ladder, temporarily frozen by my gaze, and I slammed the hatch and threw the lock a second before he slammed into it. I crawled away from the hatch, seeing it buck wildly and hearing him scream at me to open it. He cussed and howled like an angry animal, wanting to get in, but stopped by the strong bolt that some past child had installed on the sturdy hatch. Maybe they had installed it to keep him out, I thought. My fear overtopped me at some point as I watched the door jump in its frame, and I must have passed out. When the banging woke me up, it was daylight, and I screamed loud enough to startle whoever was banging. "Easy, kid. It's Sheriff Blasky. Are you okay?" I dragged myself to the hatch, my ribs aching, and threw the bolt before falling back, panting. If it was the Whistler, I hoped he was quick at least. My ribs would turn out to be broken, and their healing would encompass 2 of the worst months of my life. Every time I breathed in, I was reminded of the Whistler and that last encounter with Terry. At that moment, though, I didn't care what happened. I just wanted it to end. Sheriff Blasky pushed the flap open, though, and I guessed I'd get to live another day. He took me to the hospital. He took me into the waiting arms of my parents, who pulled me into their warm embrace and threatened to never let me go. I'd been missing for 2 days, they told me, and when the police had seen the state of our treehouse, they feared the worst. They never found any sign of Terry or Reggie. I told them what had happened. I told them about the whistling man, about Reggie's fall, and Terry charging him from the treehouse. I told them about how I'd locked the trap door and passed out as I watched the man trying to batter his way in. They took my statement, searched those woods with officers and dogs and every able-bodied set of legs they could find in town, but they never found anything. Not a scrap of cloth, not a drop of blood. My friends were just gone. That was 8 years ago. I've seen that night in my dreams every night since. The events live on in my memories, and I often wake up screaming as the man tries to break that hatch open. In my dreams, I don't pass out. In my dreams, the hatch doesn't hold. In my dreams, I wake up as he wraps his hands around my throat and drags me towards that pitch-black maw he hides behind his coat. I haven't been back in the forest since that day. I don't think I ever will. Lately, though, I've been hearing the whistling as I lay in bed at night. I look out the window, my backyard butting up to the woods, and see 2 small figures hovering on the outskirts. Sometimes the man in the coat is there too, but I know better than to try to tell my parents. They're gone when they get there, and I just end up looking crazy. I leave for college next week, and I've chosen one in the middle of a big city. I plan to attend it because the closest collection of more than 4 trees is 60 miles from my dorm. I'm hoping that distance will stop this apparition, but
I just don't know. I can hear the whistling now, even as I write this. I can hear my dead friend's soft call as they entice me to come out to play. I can hear that whistling as it scrapes across my nerves yet again. I hear it, and I hope that I get to leave for college before it becomes too much for me to bear, before it calls me back to the treehouse once again.
And just like that, our stories are over for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back again very soon with more cozy horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.